Welcome back to Your Lake Fork Guide. I bet you'll never guess who I have sitting next to me right here. If you don't know who this guy is, then you're either not from this area or you're not that into bass fishing. Mr. Mark Stevenson, Texas Fishing Hall of Famer. How you doing, sir?
I am fine. I'm ready to fish.
You're ready to fish. We are so glad to have you here today. And word has it that you know how to throw a jig a little bit. You may have done a couple things with a jig in your day.
I have done a lot of jig fishing. It's just one of those things, you know, everybody has a niche that they really like, and jig fishing's always been one of them. That I was fishing the jig back in the 70s when you had to really scrounge just to find jigs. So you know,
you had to hunt them down.
Yep. And I fish them a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Caught a lot of big fish on it. Caught my biggest fish on it.
For those that don't know, Mr. Stevenson at one time held the state record in Texas, 17 pounds, 10 ounces?
10 and a half ounces.
17 pounds, 10 and a half ounces. It was the state record for several years. That fish started a lot of stuff. And if you guys watch the channel, you'll see another video that we do where he tells the full story on the 17 pound, 10 and a half ounce fish called Ethel. So make sure you're watching the channel for that. But just giving you some of his credentials, not that he needs it. He's one of the best jig fishermen of all time in the state of Texas. He's caught the state record on one at one time. I don't know why I'm talking, but I'm going to talk about a jig a little bit too. It is also a technique that I'm very fond of. I have a little bit of knowledge on it, not compared to him. So listen to him a little bit, and then when I talk, you might want to just kind of ignore me. So there we go. A little bit of jig fishing this morning. Joker was eating that jig. Fishing the creek channel. Old black and blue flipping jig. A little short fatty. Why don't you tell us about the jig that you use?
Well, of course, this one I'm using is made by Johnson Bait Company, and it's called the Mark Stevenson Lake Fork Jig.
That's right.
This is the half ounce model, and in my mind, a half ounce is day in and day out the most versatile of all the
100%
the jig sizes. Yeah. If you're looking to buy a jig, is when you look at it, not just the color, but one thing that you really need to look for is the angle of that weed guard. You see how it's sitting out like that? You'll see a lot of them where they come out of the package and they're sitting where the weed guard's almost touching the hook. Yeah. You really don't want that. That jig is not going to come through the brush very well.
So you want to see a gap between that weed guard and that hook.
You want to see a gap, just about a 1/4 of an inch. Yeah. Seems to work out just about the best. And then they'll come with a skirt about like that. And so most of them will come with a longer weed guard. First thing I do on every one of them.
Hopefully y'all can see that he lined the scissors up parallel to the hook point.
Yep.
And cut the weed guard at that angle right there.
And that actually stiffens it up a little bit.
Makes it even stiffer.
And you can work it through that heavy stuff, but the good fish gets it. You're going to be able to compress it and catch it. And the next thing I normally do is I'll take and just grab the skirt like that and pull it and put my finger on it like that across that hook.
Where is your finger in relation to the hook?
It's right on the hook.
So his finger is right there even with the hook.
Yep. And a lot of times I'll just cut that straight across, so it's like that.
So leave about a ½ inch over your fingers?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason I cut it like that is you don't have all these extra strands coming across your trailer.
Right.
That way
it allows your trailer to get more action.
Right. And this, in the cold water, that's the way I'll fish this skirt. You see how
it's already sticking out.
That flares out.
Flares a lot more.
It makes a bigger bulk like that.
Yeah.
And so the things, you put that little hop to it, it'll compress them back, and you stop it, and that bait just hits like that, and then those little, they just kind of spread.
Yep. We talked about this a little bit on the when Andrew did a football jig video. There's something in a largemouth bass, something in their DNA. When that skirt flares out and presents a defensive posture, boy, it makes them mad, and they
get it. Don't
boy, they hit it hard when it does that.
You can put any kind of trailer on there. I fish two kind of trailers. I fish ones with big flappers like this. When I'm fishing it faster, that's the kind I'll use. Then if I'm fishing slow, real cold weather, I want a trailer that points straight back.
Yeah.
And that way you're not getting as much water resistance, and you those little bites like that, you can.
I noticed today, we're fishing January today, and you had a zoom speed crawl in there.
Right.
So you had a speed crawl in there. So.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites when the water's real cold, because they're smaller, but they stay behind, and you know, they kind of do that little twirling thing. But if you're just doing that little rhythmic jump and pump on that thing, the little turn in it is not opening up and spreading, but what it's doing is like this.
Yes,
it's
waving.
doing that little wave, same kind of little wave that the little fish's tail, what they're eating does.
Yep.
And so I personally think it keys a few more bites that way.
I think so too. I've noticed that too, that waving action, especially in the colder water, seems to be the way to go. I have a different trailer that I use, but it accomplishes the same thing. This is a Strike King Chunk. It's one of the KVD Perfect Plastic series, and it's just 2 straight claws, and it kind of does the same thing. It accomplishes the same thing. When it goes out there, that bait doesn't have anything to catch it and spin it or anything, so it's just going to wave at them. Same way, so a different plastic, but we're both doing the same thing.
Yeah, you're getting the same kind of presentation to them.
Well, we know what jig you fish. You fish the Mark Stevenson jig, and let me tell you guys something. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that jig. It is a wonderful jig. Obviously, the man has done a lot with it over the years. I'm going to show y'all just a couple different brands that I use as well. Don't get me wrong, I'll use the Mark Stevenson jig, no problem. But these are just a couple other options for you guys to look at. And this is going to look like a crazy color, and I'll explain that to you here in a second. This is a 1/2 ounce, again, same thing, sand tone rattling jig, and it comes with 2 rattles. And I'll take it out of the package and show you how it looks. This is the black, blue, and orange color, and this is a wintertime only deal for me. But that's what it looks like out of the package. You can see how big the skirt is, how long the weed guard is. So that's one brand new out of the package. Here's the one I've been fishing with. This is the bait that I've been fishing today, and you can see I trim that weed guard. I don't go at the same angle that he does, but I try to get it. For me, my rule on the weed guard is I want the end of my weed guard even with my barb.
Right.
That's what I want. I also want to ensure, and I'll even take my weed guards and bend them up and kind of flare them like that, and that gets that gap that we were talking about before. You know, my rule of thumb is basically if I can put a pretty good amount of pressure and run my finger over that weed guard, if that hook point sticks my finger at all, then I got a bad weed guard. So,
you know, on that weed guard, another little trick we do, and just kind of divide it in half.
Yep.
Just push down like that. Make a V out of it.
There you go.
And like that, and it will make that bait roll through those little limbs.
Yeah,
those little limbs will really eat you up unless
that jig rolls on its side real bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you spread those weed guards out, then they'll kick it.
Yeah. And then the other modification, of course, as you guys can see, the skirt is trimmed quite a bit shorter. Basically the same thing Mr. Stevenson said, about just below the hook, about a 1/2 inch. That's where we trim that skirt. And then the one thing I did on that black, blue, and orange, the way it comes out of the package, and Sandtone Lures is the only one that makes that black, blue, and orange color that I know of. But the way it comes out of the package, it has too much orange for what I want. So I actually trim it down and have about, a good 6 to 8 strands of orange on there is all I want. But black and blue is, in the wintertime, my favorite color. We've had some rain this week, so we had off-color water, so I'm going with a blue trailer. But I'm either going to go with that black and blue fleck like you guys saw on the other trailer, or I'm going to go with a electric blue, or a blue sapphire, some call it. It's just a bright blue color with blue flake. Real quick, the other jig that I use, it's a brand new one. It just hit the market. It's a pretty good one. 6 Sense Lures makes it. It's called a hybrid jig, and it's got a really multi-purpose head. It's got a little bevel here, kind of like a football jig, but at the same time it's got a flipping shaped head, and it's really weedless. I had one jig on all day. I never lost it, so it's coming through that cover really good. And this is just more of a darker color here with a black with a little bit of blue and gold fleck, and then a black with blue flake trailer. Pretty simple stuff there. Wintertime, that's the jigs we use. That's what we use. Basically stick to 1/2 ounce. Unless it's really windy, then I'll go to 3/4 ounce. Now, rod and rod, reel, and line. How do you got your? What setup are you working with on a jig there, Mr. Stevenson?
I have got, that's a 7 foot 1 inch smoke heavy, and those are some special rods. They're out of their, straight out of their line. It's a 7.4, and that's what most of the guys out on the tour are using. Greg Hackney, who's a big jig fisherman, Shaw Grigsby. This is they're kind of their go-to jig rod.
Okay. So the rod that you can buy at retail is a 7.4 heavy action,
7.4 heavy,
quantum
and,
smoke. That's your jig rod.
It is just a killer rod.
Yeah, that's your main day in day out jig rod right there.
And they call it a heavy, but it's heavy from here, half the rod.
It's
down,
got some tip,
but it's got an extra fast tip.
Right.
And so that lets you feel good, and you can do that little hop.
Yeah.
You get that little flex in that rod. It makes that bait comes through the brush better. It actually, I think, with that faster tip, you hook the fish better.
Yep.
Than the heavy.
I agree. I think for me the biggest thing on a rod with a jig, especially in the wintertime, is you got to have some sensitivity. I'm going with this is a Dobbins. This is actually a 704. It's a heavy rod, but it's certainly on the lighter end of heavy, and again has some tip. In the wintertime especially, some of those bites are so subtle that if you're out there fishing with a broomstick, you ain't never going to feel that bite. So a little bit extra sensitivity, especially in the wintertime. 704, that's a way smaller rod than most guys fish a jig with, but I'm going to tell you what, it's a pretty stout rod, and I can get them up and out of cover pretty good with it. The other rod that I will use also in the wintertime is a 735 from Dobbins, and like he was talking about, the shorter the rod, the less power it has to really be a stout rod. 735 is a 7'3" inch rod, where the 704 is a 7 foot even rod. 735 is one more power stiff. The 5 numbers are power number on that. So it's a stiffer rod on the 735, but it's longer.
Right. So
I still have the tip. Because that's important in jig fishing.
Absolutely. The real heavy tips are going to cost you fish.
Online, very few occasions when maybe I have a lot of heavy grass around. If I'm fishing a jig and heavy grass, I'll use braid. For the most part, for me, 100% fluorocarbon. I like, especially on Lake Fork, I'll pretty much always go with 20-pound fluorocarbon. How about you?
Me too. Normally, I'm throwing 20-pound Sunline Sniper.
Yeah, 20-pound fluorocarbon for me, that's the only way to go on a lake like this with the big fish, the heavy cover. I want, in all honesty, for me, because a lot of times wintertime jig fishing, we do fish in dirtier water, so it's not really about the visibility thing, but I think, when I'm fishing something that slow, when I'm crawling that jig just as slow as I can, that braid, when it hits a limb or something, it makes noise. You guys have all heard that braid going through your guides. It makes the same noise on that tree, and I feel like when you're doing something that slow, those fish can hear that braid, And that's why I want the fluorocarbon actually for the quietness of it when I'm jig fishing in the wintertime.
And the other thing is, like our lake, we have an overabundance of timber.
Absolutely.
And it's aged now, and you got lots of cracks. That braid is so small, it runs and just tries to run into
It'll almost cut its own groove in there sometimes.
It runs into all those cracks.
Yeah.
So you can fish 10 stumps and not get hung with your fluorocarbon.
Right.
And with the braid, you might get hung 3 or 4 times.
Right,
and
absolutely.
So,
on a reel, you know, everybody's got their favorite brand. I'm not one to sit here and pump one reel brand. I've got about 5 different brands of reels that I use. The main thing for me is it needs to be a high-speed reel. You know, even though I'm dragging that jig really, really slow in the wintertime a lot, when I get that bite, if there's any slack in that line at all, I want to get rid of it as fast as possible. They don't always hold that jig. We learned that lesson the hard way today.
Yeah.
We had some fish. I felt at least 2, I think maybe there's 3 fish that I felt actually spit my jig out. So it's important when they bite it to be able to catch up to them and get the hook in them as fast as possible.
I use a 7.3 to 1.
Right, me too. Yeah.
And I use, you know, the smoke reels for ever since they came out. You know,
Good reel.
fortunate to be sponsored by them for 30 years or so.
I'm not sponsored by them. They're a good reel. I've got one too. They are a very good reel. Well, I think that's going to cover it for gear. That's how we set up to go about it. Let's discuss areas, because jig fishing, especially primarily, let's talk about wintertime jig fishing, like what we're doing right now. It's kind of a unique deal what you're looking for, and I think maybe you might be looking for something slightly different than what I look for. I have kind of a set of rules that I go by when I'm looking for a winter creek channel, and I like to take a big creek arm and find the area where it narrows down, and then within that I want to see a lot of spawning area. That can be one giant flat, or that can be a lot of small spawning pockets, but I want to know that I have a giant spawning area close by, a lot of room for them to spawn, because I feel like the bigger the spawning area close to the creek, the more fish are going to use that creek in the pre-spawn time period, which is what we're fishing in the winter in Texas. So that's what I look for, a big creek where it narrows down and a lot of spawning area. And then the other key factor is the creek channel's got to have a good drop. If it's real silted in, I don't like to fish it. I want a creek channel that has a steep ledge on it. That's what I look for wintertime jig fishing. How about you?
Basically the same thing. I think in the wintertime you're always, a good bet is always the main lake points that have a creek biome, makes it even better.
Yeah.
And then have the timber. I'm a big fan of fishing the timber.
That's it. My theory, kind of closer towards the backs of creeks. Mr. Stevenson's theory, he does that too, but along with, he mixes in a little bit more of the main lake points with the creek channels than I do. But either way, the common denominator is creek channel bends. Creek channel bends and creek channel bends.
Yep, and points.
Creek channel bends, points, and lots of wood.
Right.
Yep. So you guys stay around those things.
We've cut some wood today.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure I derooted about 500 trees. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that covers it on areas. We're going to get up now and show you guys how we work the jig through all this heavy stuff, and what we do to try and get bites as we're coming through all this heavy cover. Fishing the jig in the wintertime is probably one of the most simple techniques when it comes to retrieving it. It's just really simple. I don't do much with the jig. I actually want that jig to move as little as possible because it's cold, and I don't think the fish are moving very much. When I want to take my time with it and really get it in their face and leave it there as long as I can. So all I'm going to do in the wintertime is I'm going to try to be on the deep side or maybe across the other side of the creek channel, and I want to throw up on the high side. So if I'm fishing a creek channel and the bottom's 20 foot of water and the top is 15, I want to throw my jig into that 15 foot of water, and I want to start a very, very slow creep of that jig. So what will happen is these trees on the edge of this creek channel, their root systems will be washed out and exposed. It creates like a mini brush pile. And a lot of times here on Lake Fork, we'll have brush piles in between the trees as well along the creek channel. People brush that up because that's a good area to fish. So when I'm dragging that jig, I'll drag along and I'll start feeling your jig will catch on those roots or catch on that brush. And I just want to ease that jig up there to it. And I'll just slowly apply more pressure. Right there, it just popped over one. So you just slowly apply more pressure and that jig will pop over it and fall. When it pops, I want to point my rod at it a little bit, feed it a little bit of line so that that jig falls straight vertically in between those roots or brush or down the ledge of the creek channel. Most of my bites, like we were talking about today, come as that jig, as I put that pressure on it, it hits that root. Right as it pops over, as soon as it starts falling, is when the majority of my wintertime jig bites come.
All right, when I'm fishing these stumps, and you just make a little pitch out there. A lot of times, if you're in the shallow water, I'll just do this pump, 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 and just keep it hopping through there. You feel it? And then, just like he was talking about, you do that little pop over, and that's when you should get bit. That's when I get when I hit about 2 or 3 of them like that in a row. I get tensed up because I just know I'm gonna get bit. But I'll fish that basically like he's talking about, just more of a drag and just that little hop. You do the dragging to locate that structure, that brush. And now I'm on one, so you can just give it a little shake like that, and you can do like he's talking about, slide it over. And what I do a lot of time is and then when I feel it gets tight like that, if I take my rod tip and just give it a little pop like that, and it makes that thing bump against that tree, and then it just does a quick jump. And sometimes that'll kill bite rather than the slow. The main thing is you have to kind of, fishing the jig, you have to stay alert. It's not one of those baits where you can look around and everything. I mean, if you're really serious about fishing it, you got to kind of pay attention to what that bait's doing, because that's the key. The presentation is the key, other than, finding the right spot. But once you find that right spot, how you fish it can make a big difference.
He's either in brush or he's big. Right there, first fish of the morning. And I set the hook and reeled it in, but it's all him. He literally called the shot. And on my first cast, I got bit, and I kind of speeded up and missed the fish. And he told me I'd catch him, and I did. Good old pre-spawn female getting ready to spawn right there. Beautiful thing. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I know this is taking a lot of time, and I hate it too, but what you got?
Mama, you just called.
He was trying to find Mama. He got lost on the way here. Look at that.
That,
Good
guys.
time when the little ones eat it like that.
Yeah.
We would like that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. If you can't go out and start fishing a jig after watching this, I don't know what to tell you, because we got pretty detailed on that, didn't we?
Oh, he did.
That's what we do here on the Your Lake Fork Guide channel. We try to go more in depth than anybody else will. We try to give up all the goods. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. I'll be honest with you, I feel really out of place trying to talk about jig fishing next to this man right here. He's one of the best ever. So thank you for sharing that knowledge.
You're more than welcome.
Talking to us about how to catch a 17-pounder on a jig. Oh my goodness. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like it, hit that thumbs up. You want to see more like it, see some of our Day on the Water series, some of our competition stuff, our challenge series, hit that subscribe button. Go check out the channel page. We got all kinds of stuff. Entertain you all day long. Once again, thanks for watching the Your Lake Fork Guide channel. Mr. Stevenson, tell them something brilliant and fishing knowledge.
Keep your hook sharp, good knots, And that's the other thing we didn't even mention about. I check my line a lot on jig fishing because you got that heavier weight. You get more abrasion out of it coming through that stuff. So, you know, always check your line. Check it very regular, and especially check it after every fish.
Here's the best tip of the day. Call this man. His number, his website is linked below in the description. His number will be on the video at some point. Call him. We're trying to close it out. He's still giving information. He's an endless wealth of knowledge. Call him. Book a trip with him. You're still actively guiding. He still actively guides on Fork. You can call this man up, pay a guide fee. He'll take you out for a full day on Lake Fork, and you get to fish with one of the true heroes of our sport, especially here within the state of Texas. So give Mr. Stevenson a call. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
It's been an honor and a privilege. Y'all tune in to Your Lake Fork Guide channel next time. We appreciate y'all watching. We'll see you then.